Everybody's all set. I will go to call to order. Kathleen Allen,
Here.
Brian Chetney,
Here.
Tom Chapa,
Here.
Heather Del Conte,
Here.
Brandon Legault. Brandon,
He's muted. Brandon, you're muted.
Brandon. Turn your mic on, please. Okay. Linda Serino,
All right.
Samuel Tripp.
Here.
At this time, I will turn the meeting over to the board and the superintendent of schools for a budget workshop.
Thank you very much. I thought before we start talking about the budget that I submitted to the board on Friday, maybe I would review the process that we've been following for any viewers that are watching. Many of them have watched the previous meetings, but there have been a lot of conversations in private that they haven't seen. As everyone knows, we've been anticipating a very difficult budget year and starting out with a significant reduction in our state aid. And for the first time in recent history, the legislative runs were less money in state school aid than the initial governor's run. We thought that might happen. In fact, it did happen. That coupled with some increased costs around special education, collective bargaining, and other typical increases in operation, we had about a $1.6 million gap. We presented that publicly. In addition, the governor's had many conversations in his press conferences over the last month, and he has talked a lot about the need for additional money to the states from the federal government, because currently New York State is estimated to have a deficit of $61 billion. He's kind of been kicking the can down the road, if you will, talking about not only the amount of state aid that may be called back, but also the time at which he would announce those drawbacks. And there were 3 windows of drawback originally. We were going with the assumption that the first drawback would be on May 15th. He indicated that. Then we received some additional information last week that suggested that he would give the federal government, Congress, another weekend, and then perhaps announce the first school aid drawback on Monday. He indicated on Friday that our information was correct, that he was not going to make his first announcement of school aid drawbacks. And so based on that intelligence that came to us middle of last week, we sat down and attempted to balance the budget with the existing $1.6 million natural gap that we already knew was a for sure thing. Understanding that we were required to adopt our budget, regardless of what it was, on Tuesday the 19th. So there was little time to spare, and I didn't feel comfortable waiting until Friday or Monday when the governor rolled out another percentage of school aid drawback in order to really attack that budget. However, the board was provided with significant considerations over the last several weeks about things to consider should he in fact do that. So we were trying to be prepared so that we weren't caught in the lurch should he ask for a significant dollar amount back. We at one point were planning on around 12%. The governor talked about different numbers of school aid reduction or drawback from 5% to as much as 20%. We planned for 12%, which is a significant dollar amount. 20% for Oswego is about $6 million. But as luck would have it, he didn't call for a drawback in the first window that he reported out in the earlier part of this process. So we were able to create a balanced budget, and that's what I will go through for you tonight. So as I previously stated, currently New York State has a $61 billion deficit. Much of that money would be drawn back. A lot of that money would be drawn back from school districts, municipalities, and civil service groups and healthcare. The promise was that we would have numbers by the 15th. The 15th has come and gone. Monday now has come and gone. And he indicated that he may not, in fact, ask for any additional refunds from school districts and state aid until the end of May or as late as July. So we got busy last week and we tried to attempt, well, we did balance a budget based on a combination of reductions in our budget of $764,796. We made every attempt, and I think we did a pretty decent job of keeping any reductions as far away from instructional programs, staffing, or children's programs. Additionally, for the first time in many years, first time ever, I'm making a recommendation that the board appropriates fund balance in the amount of $837,811. I've talked an awful lot over the past several years about the risk of using too much reserves and fund balance. As the community knows, and the board certainly knows, in 2016, we were on the comptroller's list of districts at risk of being in fiscal stress. And that was because we had a longstanding practice of using significant dollars from reserves and fund balance to balance our budgets. So we have largely stayed away from that practice over the last 5 years. But I was reminded that these reserves and fund balance dollars are for a rainy day. They're for emergencies. And this is definitely a period, this is an emergency period for our school districts, as well as a lot of school districts, all school districts that rely heavily on state aid. And so we're proposing to allocate 837 from our surplus. That it does not exhaust that our budget surplus. There's still are dollars there that Nancy will talk about in a few minutes. So should the governor, or when the governor pulls back some additional state aid, that might be a place that we start taking another look at. So we're presenting a balanced budget right now of $88,505,455. So our revenues and our, yes.
Are you going to put the PowerPoint up?
I can't, I don't know how to do that, Sam. I'm not going to put the PowerPoint up, but, do you mean post it?
Yes. Well,
Yes.
yeah. So that, I mean, the community is watching this meeting, this budget workshop. They should be able to do that.
Yeah, Jamie can do that. Jamie can post it right now to the website.
Okay.
Dean, what was the number? 88? Because that's not the number on the PowerPoint.
Yeah, I have the PowerPoint that I sent you Friday in front of me.
That's what I've got open. That
2021 is 88,505,455. Page 4.
Why does mine say 89,270?
That's the old one, I believe.
That's not the one from Friday.
That's the one I opened up.
Well, then you made a mistake because mine says the same as Dean's.
When did you send it? I don't even.
The email on Friday had 3 attachments: a memo, the PowerPoint, and a new copy of the actual budget for you.
Right.
Kathleen, the first page of the PowerPoint that we're working off right now says May 18th.
Okay, what date did you send it? I'm trying to find it on my.
Friday. Yep.
And the only attachment I have on mine is the PDF, the 58-page PDF. That's all. I'm looking at it right now.
You might have to scroll up and down to find the other 2 documents that are there.
I did.
There should be 3 of them right in a row. And they were all attached at the same time. It was a group email.
It's got Nancy. Nancy sent it to you. It's the PDF of the.
Is that on the 15th?
Mm-hmm.
Let me go to my sent items just to make sure. Well, does every other board see 3 documents on Friday?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kathleen, I think you're probably just looking at the wrong email. Because it was a group email that I have.
It came directly from Dean.
I have a group serve. It came from.
I'm looking at reserve funds, fund balance, 2 attachments. And then all those numbers with the TRS, the workman's comp,
Kathleen, I just resent it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that because it is not showing up.
It's probably just, we've been sending so many of these, you might just be looking at the wrong one. Okay, so our proposed budget is $88,505,455. So what I'm going to like to do is I'll go through line by line, and I'm not going to give you the budget line item. You have the budget in front of you, but I'll talk about I'll mention what the line item is and the amount. And remember that these reductions are coupled with that piece of reserve that I talked about a few minutes ago. Let me get that page ready here.
Hey, Dean,
Yeah.
just for somebody that might have just checked in or might be watching or is going to watch,
Yep.
could you just give a little bit of a summary on why there was a budget increase from the 86,034 to the 88,505, just in summary, so they can get some background on, because if I'm a taxpayer, I'm looking at this saying, why did it go up $2 million, right?
So what you're asking for is where did the 1.6 come from?
Correct.
Yes. The 1.6, thank you, Jamie. The $1.6 million is a combination of things. First, it's a reduction in state aid, and Nancy will tell you the exact amounts. It's a reduction in state aid. It's an increase in special education costs. It's a natural increase to the budget relative to collective bargaining, and also some natural cost increases related to just operational expenses, fuel, electricity, contracts, and I'm not talking about collective bargaining. I'm talking about contracts with, waste removal, things like that, fuel, electricity, gas. So all whole, there was a natural increase in the budget, which you would have always, but that coupled with a significant increase in special education costs and a reduction in state aid is why we're at the 1.6.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep. So now there's a few things I want to point out about the line by line reductions that you're going to see in a minute. In some cases, and this is a very important point, in some cases, the reductions that we have recommended are areas in the budget where there likely would not be a need for the expense anyways because of the change in our operational situation related to COVID-19. And I'll give you an example before I go in line by line. You're going to see a middle school summer school, for example. Middle school summer school is $57,932. Well, we already know there is no middle school summer school. So that was a painless reduction to make. So some of the things are reductions that were easy to make because they were related to our current situation. And some of the other reductions are not full line reductions, but they're a reduction in a particular line where we believed we could still operate effectively by tightening our belt in a particular area.
Dean, can I ask you a question before you move on?
Yep.
In the slides that are coming up, at the top of the second one, it says reductions included in this budget, and then the subsequent ones say other possible reductions. But they're all of those reductions are collected, correct? They total out.
Yeah.
So
you'll
it's
see
not possible reductions. Those are
correct.
all okay.
Well, they're possible reductions until we all decide that those are the ones we want to make.
Right. So the whole thing, they're all possible reductions. So
That's correct. And you'll see a page subtotal and then the total amount at the end.
right. I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you.
Yep. So on page 5, these are the reductions that we recommend. As again, I said, some of these are whole line reductions and some are partial. School board retreat, $2,500. Superintendent supplies, $2,600. I'll give you a little background on some of these if I can. As you know, I've had lunches with students over the last several years. I also have coffee hours and things like that. Sometimes I buy prizes for students or other things, and also other supplies that might come out of the superintendent's office, $2,600. I don't know if those same practices will be put into place by the new superintendent. If that person would create their own traditional activities. $15,000 for administrative retreat. Let me talk about that. If you go back to history of administrative retreats in Oswego since I've been superintendent, we have never paid for a venue. We have never gone overnight for administrative retreat. I think it's also important to point out that some of these line item budget items have what are called notes. And those are what you see under the line item description. Notes are a practice from Nancy. Nancy started putting notes in, and those notes really are to help guide her to where certain monies are in the budget. Even though they're labeled something doesn't mean that they might not fund something else. So the retreat line might also pay for professional development. It might pay for bringing Ross Green in to facilitate something for administrators or something else on literacy or leadership or poverty or something like that. Next is record management services, $25,000. That's a BOCES COSER that we think we can do without for a year. We're proposing to reduce our BOCES public relations to level 2. And there are different levels that you can purchase at BOCES for the PR services. And we think that by reducing to level 2, we can still enjoy the services of BOCES, but not spend as much money. So the reduction there is $18,430. We have an employee that we're going to move from facilities to food service to take it out of the regular budget because food service runs their own budget. That's a reduction of $19,803. This next one is a perfect example of a line budget that we always have. There won't be summer workers this summer. That would be a result of social distancing and COVID, as well as the capital project, because our summer workers work in teams. There's a paint crew, there's a buildings and grounds crew. They travel and work in teams. So we think the responsible thing is to reduce that budget line. The next is is kind of disappointing. This was to be somewhat of a surprise, but we've been working over the last year to, excuse my squeaking dog. We've been working over the last year to be the first school district in New York State to have a fully trained service security dog at the Oswego High School. And the cost was $30,000. We've cut that. Conference travel, $10,000. I reported to the board a few months ago that we were happy to bring back the SUNY Oswego Writing Institute, and Oswego School District would be the sponsor. That had a cost of $10,000 to have that sponsorship, and that would allow our staff to continue to go to the SUNY Oswego Writing Institute. That Writing Institute has been canceled, largely due to the reduction in the revenue support from the district. So that page reduction is $188,333.
Dean, can I ask a question before you move on?
Yes.
The dog, was that $30,000 a year, or was this a one-time?
Nope. This was the one-time $30,000 all inclusive, and that would have paid for Officer Berger to travel to New Jersey to be trained. They were in the process of selecting our dog. She would have been trained on site at School Dogs is the name of the company, SK, School Dogs. She would have been trained. She would have been the handler. The dog would have lived with Lori Berger. And then they would also have come to Oswego upon delivery in August, and they would have done on-site training. That dog would have been housed at the Oswego High School, but would have been visible across our district and all our buildings and facilities. The difference between school dogs and other police dogs is that the school dog is a combination of service, weapons and gunfire, but it's also socialized to be in a community of children and teachers. So it's not just a police dog. It's a unique dog that is trained specifically to work and live in schools. It would have added a whole nother element of school safety and security for our students.
Is it
So
go ahead, Heather.
Yes.
Oh, I was just thinking, typically when we're budgeting, obviously there's those one-time
Yes.
expenses.
This is a
but it's
one-time,
on the
Heather.
future
You're
at
correct.
30.
Mhm.
So what about care for the dog, vet care, all of that? Is that included as well, or is that something that we would budget in future years?
We would budget for feeding of the dog, annual veterinary checks, and annual retrainings are all included.
And the life expectancy of the service?
10 years. Tom Buckle was negotiating the contract with the company. He reviewed the contract for us to make sure that this was something that we wanted to do before I brought it to the board. But now we have notified them that because of budget, that at this time we're not planning to take delivery of a dog for the 2020 school year.
Dean,
Would that have
I
had to
I just
be
interrupt?
approved?
We dropped, I just got a message that the streaming dropped, Jamie. It's no longer, people that were watching it, it's not on BuckNet anymore.
Dean, is that dog a drug dog?
I don't really want to talk about the specifics of what the dog does, Sam, because of the service it'll provide. But this is a pretty all-inclusive dog.
Okay, enough said.
Yep, because you
Would
may
that
purchase this
have
dog in
been-
the future.
Would that have had to have been approved by the board?
Yes. I was going to do a presentation and show you some videos
Uh-huh.
about it. I sent Pat Wallace to actually meet the company, see a service dog in service from this company. And
Uh-huh.
we were very excited about this. I also have already met with the Oswego Police Department because we would have had needed a certain level of approvals from them as well.
Mhm.
Because Lori we offset the cost of Lori Berger as an officer to the OPD, but she still is an Oswego police officer. And we needed their approvals for her to have and manage this dog. And she had already committed. In fact, it was Lori Berger that brought us this concept. She saw school dogs at a school safety conference and came and met with me, very excited about this.
I just got a message that we're back live.
We're good. Okay.
Dean, what is the annual fee that we would incur that you would typically have,
I think
scheduled for?
we would figure that in the first year. It would be food for
but
the
you don't
dog.
have a roundabout, you don't have an estimate on what that would have cost per year?
Probably the same as any dog, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it wouldn't have
Yeah.
had special needs.
Yeah. But annual
Which-
vet visits in the care of the dog, if the dog went bad on us or was unhealthy, those were the details in the contract that we were working out so that we would be fully protected, as well as protected in the event that something happened with the dog that was hurtful to the dog or to a person or a trainer. We were covering our bases relative to insurance. Okay. Page 6. Next, no, go back one. Thank you. Next is Mentor Scholar Program through SUNY Oswego. This is Oswego High School and Oswego Middle School. There are a lot of unanswered questions about what SUNYs are going to look like in the fall, and certainly what we are going to look like in the fall. As you know, sometime this summer, there'll be a template brought out by the State Education Department, and I'll be required to write and submit a reentry plan for public school in New York State. And there will be more guidance on that, and we will have to talk about what the opening of the school year really looks like. Well, we already know that there's no middle school summer school. We already know that deep into the summer, it's not going to be business as usual. And there's still a lot of unanswered questions relative to fall extracurricular activities and athletics. Some of that will be guided by the State Ed Department, and some of that will be guided by Section 3 in the New York State Public High School Athletic Association. But we don't know what's going to look like at the college. So it's going to be very unlikely that we're inviting college students who aren't even in real classes yet, if we don't know, into our school to work one-on-one with students after school. So that there are two budget lines that support that program. One pays for the mentor scholar salary of the mentor scholar supervisor, and the other one are stipends under ACTA that pay those mentor scholar teachers for supervising that. This would be the one piece of the budget that that supports review and enhancement of instruction. This is the one piece that would be close enough to is close to students. But there's so much uncertainty about what SUNY Oswego will even be doing, and certainly what Mentor Scholar will be doing. In the middle there is AmeriCorps. We have an AmeriCorps worker at Frederick Layton School. Again, we're being very sensitive to the idea of bringing outsiders into the buildings because we're not even sure that we're going to have 100% of our student population there every day. The next line is teacher substitutes. This is a line reduction, not in totality. Teacher substitutes in the line of $25,000. Many of these are related to the costs associated with doing small and large group professional development during the day. And there likely won't be any of that because of social distancing. So we believe that a $25,000 reduction in our substitute line was safe. Again, professional development, $38,000. Home instruction, again, we're not going to we're actually going to send our staff into homes for a while. So Dr. Duffy felt that a $20,000 reduction in home instruction line was responsible. Elementary after-school stipends of $12,000. Equipment schools, that's the furniture replacement that we started a few years ago, $205,000 for school furniture replacement. Drivers at regular year, $34,566. In the merry-go-round theater, which is an enrichment program that we have in our schools through Arts and Education, $60,000. So the page subtotal is $454,191.
Nancy, in the building project, is there any money set aside for equipment? Classroom furniture, equipment?
I'd have to go back and look, Linda. There are some incidentals factored into the capital budget, but I would need to review the plan to see exactly how much, and I can get back to you in a memo.
Yeah, I'd like that.
Typically, Linda.
And one more question. Oh, go ahead, Dean.
Typically, furnishings and things like that can't be embedded into a capital project, but there are certain, according to Craig, and Nancy can articulate it better in a memo, according to our architects and designers, there are pockets of the capital project where funding of furniture and equipment is allowable.
Right, I knew that. I just wondered where we were. The other question I have is on home instruction with the technology, and I'm assuming those are students that have been suspended or out sick or whatever. Now that we have technology in all of the homes, would we be using that as servicing our students?
Yeah, we wouldn't be relinquishing our legal responsibility to provide a certain amount of tutoring for a child that was out on long-term health concern or is out of school for a long-term suspension. But most of our students that are out on long-term suspension, 9 through 12, are housed in our in-house suspension program. But yes, we still have a responsibility to tutor at a minimum level.
Dean,
Next, yeah.
is AmeriCorps at any other buildings?
No.
No, recently it's just been Layton.
Okay.
There have been years in the past, Kathleen, where it was all over the district.
That's what I
What
thought.
about the bookmobile?
What was that?
Dean, what about the bookmobile? Didn't we have a couple teachers that supported the bookmobile? through AmeriCorps?
Carrie can answer that. Some of our, yes, we do have some teachers that are paid a stipend for their coordination of the bookmobile, and then we have a lot of other teachers who just volunteer on the
Right.
bookmobile.
So is
We
that-
haven't made any reduction in that
Oh, okay.
because we haven't had conversation, but Carrie sits on the executive committee for the bookmobile. They're planning.
Yeah, we haven't, Oswego has really truly, our commitment with the bookmobile has been about the bus. We haven't been paying teachers, although we have many volunteers that work on the bookmobile. we haven't been paying any of the stipends in a couple years now.
Or AmeriCorps?
No, I'm sorry, that's a bookmobile.
Bookmobile.
Yeah, but I thought we had put a couple AmeriCorps. I haven't been involved in a few years, but I thought we placed like college students through AmeriCorps.
I think
No.
the bookmobile places AmeriCorps workers in the bookmobile, Linda, but we don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, and then teen drivers ed, I have a question about.
Yes,
Don't the students pay for that?
Nancy?
So doesn't that cover itself?
I don't think
It
that
goes through both, it goes through BOCES COSER, both regular year and summer drivers ed, but we're not even sure they're going to be able to have that program. We haven't gotten any information from BOCES on whether or not that's going to continue.
But what Kathleen is asking is, do students pay for that, or do we pay for
They
it?
do pay for it. Some of it is offset by the district for the BOCES aid that we would receive on it. So we fund the part of the driver's ed that has BOCES aid that we have not received yet, because the aid follows the year after.
So it sounds
So-
like what you're saying is the student pays a portion.
The student pays a portion, the district pays the portion, then we receive aid on it in the subsequent year.
Okay. So we don't know, Kathleen, yet if there even will be there won't be summer driver's education.
No, but so
But
Nancy,
As far as
that number,
Yeah.
is that's before your, how
That's
much?
before aid, because that's before the aid that we would get back, because we wouldn't receive the aid until the year following when we paid for it.
And
Because
so
the aid
then
follows it. Pardon me?
how many students do we typically get for that?
I would have to go back and look. I'm not sure.
And this is just regular school driver's ed, Kathleen. On the next page,
Right, through
there's
the school
summer.
year.
Yep,
Right.
regular summer. And then merry-go-round.
Dina-
play. Yeah,
Yeah, I was gonna ask about the merry-go-round. Is that that's not a grant? That's something we budget every year? $60,000?
yeah. Well, when we haven't always done merry-go-round theater, but we've always done arts and education, which is through a coaster at BOCES. Nancy, yours.
We've done the merry-go-round theater for the last 2 years, and they gave us a discounted rate. So now we're on an annual contract with them. It is about $60,000 a year. And again, this is a service that goes through BOCES, so we would get aid on it. But the aid would follow in the following year. So it would follow in
2021.
21, 22.
But doesn't that catch up to you after a while so that the aid
You're
is
always-
offsetting the cost in your budget?
Our aid changes, our aid ratios change every year. So even though they may say, well, this is covered by BOCES aid this year at this amount, when we actually get the aid, those percentages may increase or they may decrease. So we would not be able to offset the whole of that.
Okay, and just lastly, so I understand it, this is more than just sending a couple kids to go see a play. This is more than that?
They come into the schools and they either work with the classes, put on productions, or actually help students write plays. And it is a K-12 program.
And it is expensive.
Yeah. I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah, and we always called it arts and ed, and we would subcontract out with a variety of other separate vendors. Sometimes you'd have authors, or you'd have the circus, or you would have a variety of things that would come into the school or that students would go out to. And a couple of years ago, we went to a merry-go-round all-inclusive arts and ed program. But it is expensive. Sometimes the Home and School Association supplement in some of the schools, the arts and ed programs as well.
So Nancy, I have a question. What did we get aided this year for those two programs?
I don't have information, Brandon, but I'll get it to you.
Thank you.
What typically is our ratio, Nancy? What's the ballpark?
It's usually 68%.
Okay.
But they actually gave us a deal, so I'd have to look at the contract on how they worded it. Because over a 2-year program that we signed up for originally, we received a discounted rate for those 2 years. So I would have to go back to the contract. There is money left though in the arts and ed budget for other things. So there's about $20,000 left for speakers and programming that they can bring into the schools. So we haven't cut the whole budget, but we did cut this one piece of the budget.
Right. And part of what informed that, Brandon, or everybody, is we are already having some questions about whether this was a good value for our kids.
Well, the reason I asked the question is I understand we got to put a line item in the budget for, basically a refund the following year. But if to Heather's point, it's got to catch up with you at some point. If you decide to stop the program, you get the reduced funding. I get it, but this year in this budget, these numbers are net zero because we've already received the refund from the state. So the initial cost, I'm assuming, was at the beginning when we didn't get that, right? But I guess I don't understand. I guess I don't understand it being a line item for reduction if we have already received the money. That's what I guess I don't understand, but
because
the annual cost for this year, Brandon, would be $60,000. We would be receiving a refund for whatever the cost was for merry-go-round last year and this year's BOCES reimbursement. But it wouldn't be $60,000. It would be whatever percentage of last year's cost was for 1920. So it's offset, but the number would never match.
It's like school buses.
Yeah.
It's like buses, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. We have to put the outlay, but we know we're going to get it on the back end.
Anything that's aidable, yes.
Right.
That's true. But good question. Number 7. So number 7, again, most of these go to a natural reduction in programs because of COVID-19. Summer weight room stipend. We wouldn't be bringing students into the weight room to work with weight room trainer at that cost, particularly because that section of the Oswego High School is under construction. Middle school, summer school has already been cut. That came with a cost of $57,932. Summer driver's ed is $17,590. Summer regencies have already been canceled. The cost of that is $12,789. Summer transportation for drivers, gas, transportation aids, and some and associated ERS costs are the last 4 lines. So the page subtotal for that page is $122,272. Page 8. So page 8 is a recap of what we've been talking about from the beginning. Our original gap is $1,602,607. We just listed line by line budget reductions of $764,796, and I'm recommending an appropriation of appropriated fund balance of $837,811 to balance the budget at 0. Any other questions I can answer, or Nancy can?
Dean, was there any savings because we haven't had school as far as transportation with gas, overtime, and have we had to pay the bus drivers?
We're paying an annualized salary to our regular drivers, and as well as their benefits, certainly. But yes, there would be some natural savings in the cost of overtime and fuel.
And fuel. So is that, do we know what that's going to look like? And can that be utilized in next year's budget?
Yeah, that would go to the last line, Linda, which is the application of fund balance. So any of those unused expended costs contribute to our anticipated fund balance for 1920, which is where this money's coming from. So it would go in there. So it's being applied now.
Okay.
That
And
was
right
not the-
now,
Sorry.
right
yeah.
now, Linda, we are projecting a $1.3 million surplus at the end of the year. That changes daily, but any savings from transportation is part of that anticipated surplus at the end of the year.
Okay.
So
Okay,
right,
there's no increase in taxes, in school taxes this year.
Nancy, talk about that. That's not part of my presentation, but go ahead.
Well, right now, we're not, but we don't have the full tax rolls yet. We won't have the tax rolls until July. When we have the tax rolls, we'll go through and put all of the figures in there. But right now, it doesn't look like there's going to be a tax increase this year, but we'll know more fully when we get all of the assessments and put all of those into our tax calculator. But right now, based on current assessments, it doesn't look like there's going to be a tax increase, but again, we won't know until July.
Well,
Dean?
that doesn't make sense to me. If we're putting a budget out on June 9th, our ballots have to be back on June 9th, we're putting the budget out without telling the community members about any tax increase?
Live stream's down again.
Yeah, this is all, mine's frozen.
Mine's good. If you freeze, it's on your end. If the live stream
No,
goes,
I'm WBUC.
yeah, I know, Kathleen. The WBUC is Karen.
It's down again.
Okay.
So what I will have, if this is the budget that we're going through, I will have at the board meeting tomorrow, the slide that we always show you about the tax increase on a $100,000 home. I'll have that same information that we always provide, but I couldn't do that until I was sure that you were going to approve this part of the budget.
Oh, okay. Well, I was thinking you were saying that you wouldn't know what that would look like until July, and I'm thinking it has to be on
But
our.
what we always do, Linda, is we always base the taxes on the current assessments, what we have at the time. Those change when we get the final tax rolls. That's what I was saying. And so what we always tell the voters is, this is what we anticipate your tax rate will go. 99% of the time, it's always lower than what we say it's going to be. But the actual tax rolls won't come out until July, so that we get a firm number before we put out the tax bills. But I will have a slide for the board meeting tomorrow.
And will there be variables on that? I mean, will there be options?
I think that another piece of information that might help Linda is that there are years when we built budgets where we went out for a specific increase in taxes in order to generate revenue.
Yes.
We didn't do that this time.
Okay,
We are trying to keep
I was
it tight.
confused.
And I think that the other thing that maybe made you confused, Linda, is that even when we do that, it's an estimate. Because until the actual rolls come to us in July, we don't know what because we don't really control all of that.
Mhm.
We use the tax cap calculator and we submit all our dollars into the SED portal, and that stuff gets generated. But even when if we went out and said, well, we're asking the community to support it, like we did with the capital project,
Right.
with a 3% contribution, which is $12 on a $100,000 home. Even when we do that, it's an estimate.
I get it.
Okay.
You're saying tomorrow we'll have an estimate?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we have to at least give an estimate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dean?
Yeah.
I guess what I'm not understanding is, in the past, you've not wanted to use any fund balance. And I think that was the right way to go. And now all of a sudden you're going to use 837. Is it 837? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
To balance this budget.
Yeah.
I don't understand if Nancy just said that we're going to have unspent funds from this year's budget of over $1 million. Would we tap into our fund balance?
Sam, there's two answers to your question. The first is, you're right. I've never believed that that was a good practice. However, right up until last week when I talked to the board about this for the first time, I still hated that practice. And it's not a sustainable practice that a district would want to do year after year. But as of last week, I was the only superintendent in the county that wasn't going to apply reserves and fund balance because everyone has these gaps. So that's the answer to why I've had a change of thought. We have to, it's an emergency. The second answer to your question is, right now we have an anticipated fund balance from this year of 1.3 million. That's where that 837 is coming from. It's this year's fund balance. It's this year's anticipated fund. It's left over from 1920 that we want to apply.
Revenue, yeah.
Yep.
So it's really not coming out of the fund balance as per se this year.
It's not coming out of reserves.
The reserves.
It's coming out of what we think we're gonna, when we ring the rag at the end of the year and we have savings with fuel and we have savings with this and we maybe over budgeted unemployment, and then we have this fund balance. What I'm saying is take 800 of that 1.3 and let's use it.
Yes, that makes more sense now.
Well, it's not fund balance, it's unspent money from this year's budget.
It's budget surplus.
The term fund is this year's budget, and the balance that's left over at the end of the year is the fund balance.
Okay.
Yep.
Mike,
Or another, you could also call it budget surplus.
That's-
Budget
That being said, if we got 1.3 and you're only going to use 837, then there's still going to be 500,000 more somewhere laying around.
There's still about 500,000 we anticipate, but we also anticipate that the governor may come back and say, you owe me this.
Okay. Because as I looked, I studied the last budget status report, the one I've tried, and I still see a lot of places in there where we could make some cuts. I know Nancy, we talk about breakage, and Nancy says, we got to replace those people, and those are placeholders, blah, blah. Well, when you got a teacher retiring at 115,000, I know we're not going to replace that teacher with 115,000. And there's a number of them. So there's more money in that budget, in that status report that we could be pulling out if we need it.
Yes. And I think you make a good point. Not only is there going to be another $500,000 in budget surplus, if that makes it easier to understand, but there also are other areas, some of which I've provided in PowerPoints for your consideration, and other ways of squeezing the towel if we need to. But we fully expect that he's going to come back and ask for a percentage of our school aid. So we need those places in order to go back in round 2 and say, okay, now what? Are we going to go to this? Are we going to go to that? Do we want to not go with? See what I mean? We need all those sources.
So my thinking then is what you're presenting is we're holding some cards back for the next round.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
So
We didn't spend all 1.3 million because I expect he's going to ask for money back.
Oh, I agree. I'm sure he will.
Yep.
So the other part that we have to talk about too is that we're only using a portion of the surplus from this year. The rest of the surplus, I'll bring resolutions to you like I do every year to say, let's use that the remainder of that money to fund these reserves up to this level. And there are some reserves which if the governor does take back more money, I can come back to the board and say, will the board allow us to use these reserves if the board so chooses, to fund any additional takebacks from the governor. So that has to happen so that we're not over our 4% cap.
Right.
I say it's a good discussion to clear up a lot of gray areas that people may not understand, budgets and reserve funds, and how do we put money in reserve funds and all that. So thank you for answering those questions.
And they're all good questions. There are certain reserves that are restricted. And once the board designates fund balance or budget surplus to a particular reserve, you would have to go out and ask the voters to approve the allocation of some of those. There are other reserves that the board can say, let's fund this reserve And we know that we can get to that money quickly.
Right.
Dean, can
Well,
I,
I think the budget you've got, I really don't think there will be a tax increase. I
I
don't
don't
see
think
how
so
you
either.
shouldn't need to be.
but here's my question. Are we going to be in the same position if we use those fund reserves now, that it's going to affect us relative to aid in the future years? And also keep in mind that the pilot negotiation with Exelon, and if that's going to hit us, would we be better off tightening up and not using as much of that now? So just looking ahead 2-3 years down the road, or are we going to get hit both from reduction in aid because we're utilizing it, and also getting hit with because Exelon went on to the tax rolls?
Well, there's again, there's multiple answers to that. The first one is that, remember, we put Exelon on the tax rolls because we had a deadline in order to do that, in order to submit required paperwork to the state. We had to put them on the state roll, on the tax rolls. However, without saying too much in public, we are still negotiating with Exelon, and there still is a chance that we would get a 412A pilot, but not at a reduced amount from the proposed 2021 budget. So then we would not take a hit in 3 years on state aid. The only danger in using reserves or fund balance now is that some would argue, including me, that you're creating somewhat of a gap for next year's budget because it's not renewable.
Hey, Dean.
And that's why we have to be careful to balance the use of some reserves and fund balance and hold on to some for next year, because all indications are next year is going to be tough too. Brandon?
Yeah, so I think, I agree with Sam. I think that I think we need to focus on making sure that there isn't a tax increase, right? And
Yep.
you know that I'm a fan of that, but especially this year with the circumstances that we're in, people aren't going to be able to afford it. So I think, coming out with a zero and working towards that zero would be the best, instead of saying that it's an estimate and there may be a tax increase. I think that the public, to Linda and Sam's point, should be known that there isn't going to be a tax increase this year.
Well, there's always, remember, you're always balancing the need for generating revenue, the essential need for generating revenue, with the expenditures that our district has. My only caution to you guys is that we don't know how hard we're going to get hit in the coming months from the state, and none of us know really.
Right.
But we absolutely tried to balance that reality with the current situation that everybody's in financially.
Yeah, I just think to Sam's point, and I agree with him. There's more room to move in the budget that we haven't looked at. You gave us a PowerPoint a few weeks ago that we looked at, and there was a heck of a lot in there that we were able to look at. So again, I think you have to make every attempt to get to the zero, and if it means diving a little bit deeper into some of those pockets that Sam had mentioned or that we saw a few weeks ago, I think that's very important to do.
Okay. Yep. What we tried to do is generate this bank of options for you over the last month or so.
Yeah.
Because we knew there would be waves of reductions likely, and now we have those resources, and we can tap into those when we need to.
And I think it's great, right? I mean, over the last few years, you guys have done a great job budgeting, where we had, if you remember back 2 years ago, we had that surplus. We had to move it around. Nancy made some suggestions, and we were legally made to move that around because we were getting close to that percentage that we were going to go over. So we moved those, and some of those reserves are there now with the money sitting that we can move around if we need to. So, kudos. You did a good job. You guys did a good job.
Thank you. It's been it's been a tough month for everybody, for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. Oh, I understand.
Heather?
Yeah, I do appreciate all the work that's been put into this, and I love, looking at options that don't necessarily hurt students or our staff and faculty. The one question I have, and I mean, one of our goals was to have a long-term budget, and obviously I know we're limited in perspective right now because, the unimaginable is happening and the unforeseeable is right in front of us. So, but I worry about, you know, a lot of these cuts are very temporary. So looking at the next budget, we would have to put a lot of this back in. And so it kind of, it may possibly duplicate the effect that Tom was talking about, where, you know, next year we're even in a worse situation because we have to put some of these things in. So I don't want to superficially depress a budget because we're only eliminating things that COVID took out of our hands. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand. I think that what we tried to, if you look at all of the things that we put on here, many of them could be sustained long term if you had to, under crisis situation where we're in budget deficit of $3 to $6 million, for example. You could go without driver's ed. You could go without Mentor Scholar. You could suspend PDs and professional development and field trips and things like that. Nobody wants to do those things, but I think in those banks of options that I provided in those prior two PowerPoints that weren't public, those are really painful cuts. And I just feel relieved that in round one, we were able to balance this budget in a really tight way and not get into any of that, because that's long-term damage.
Yeah, I think though, you know, to Heather's point, we got to start looking at a 5-year plan versus a year-to-year plan, right? And
Yeah.
I think the board's got to start diving in a little bit more line items and what do we need and what do we don't need, right? And it's nobody wants to eliminate a program or take anything away or anything like that, but you know, maybe there's grants out there, maybe there's other funding that we can go out and find instead of budgeting a line item for us, you know, those types of things. So I think going forward, I think the board, the up and coming board, is going to have to be very engaged into what the next 5 years looks like.
Yeah, I think that what our task has been since 2015 has been to build operational budgets that provided good instructional programs, but also we are rebuilding our reserves and fund balance. And thank God, because now we need them again.
Because of what you guys have done over the last 10 years, we're in a pretty good position where we're not diving deeper into our budget,
right?
Program wise.
Yes. Okay. So Nancy will send out another PowerPoint for tomorrow night. I will go through, do you want me to do another presentation for people who might turn in for the regular board meeting before the adoption of the budget? We wouldn't typically do that 2 days in a row, but we can.
So Dean, my thought is much like I asked you to do at the beginning today with the summary of the difference. I think that's important. Yep. I think it's also important to talk about the fund balance a little bit and how we got there and why we have why we're pulling the reserves from there, because a lot of people have heard that you don't like to be there, right?
Right.
And then I would also talk to why we chose the programming that we did and the possibility of looking at the budget a little deeper as we go along. But
yeah, you've noticed, I'm sure, over the last several years that, I'm a literacy guy. So I like to roll things out in a story. And so it's always helpful to tell the story of where we were, how we got here, what the thought process was, so people can understand it. So I like that feedback is something I understand. Sam?
I may be the only one in existence that thinks this way, but using the term 837,000, using the term fund balance to me is confusing because I don't see it as fund balance. I see it as unspent funds from this year's budget.
That's the exact accounting terms that we have to use. It's called appropriated fund balance. Sorry.
But it's real. Sam's right.
That is
It's really budget surplus.
Yeah. Conceptually,
I think
it's not surplus. It's unspent funds.
The differentiation is reserves versus fund balance, I think, is the differentiation. Yes. So, but fund balance is what we use to replenish our reserves. So that is important to know.
Yeah. So Sam, once it's unspent, it becomes
surplus.
Yeah. One other thing too is, is these retirements and vacancies roll in, and Brandon's talking about a long range plan. I think we need to do a deep dive into what positions we're replacing and what we may not, in order to save some funds down the road, years come.
It's going to be a heavy lift again next year, and
It sure will.
you should start you should start looking at it as soon as we're done with this one.
And probably the year after that.
Yeah, and we're going to know a lot more in the coming months as we start to get a lot more guidance about not only funding, but also about requirements around the instructional program. Because these are uncharted waters, and I'm hopeful that, by the end of August, we can submit and have approved your reentry instructional plan for the kids for September.
Dean, when will you be announcing the people that are running for the board?
That Karen can answer that.
I can tell you tonight who has turned in petitions. It would be James McKenzie and Pam Dowd. We do have 3 positions open.
And who's Mackenzie?
James McKenzie, he has been to a few of our board meetings. You may remember him.
Yeah.
From the turf discussions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Professor at the college.
Mhm.
So I have a lot of announcements and good news things for our regular board meeting, but I wasn't going to share them tonight because this was supposed to be about talking about the budget. But so there's going to be a lot of stuff tomorrow under the superintendent's report as well.
That's something to look forward to.
What?
I said something to look forward to. That's ironic.
I know, this is
that's
great.
unique for
I
a
will
school
tell you
board meeting.
this. I have an 8 o'clock Google Meets with our graduation committee,
Yay.
and we're going to make some exciting announcements quite soon.
I'll be listening in the background.
Yeah.
I have a senior that's joining tonight.
Yeah, Heather will too, I believe. So
Would
not
there
to let
be-
the cat out of the bag because we haven't finalized all the decisions, but it's very student led. I asked for a committee to be created 2 weeks ago. Tammy Palmatesso took the lead. They've met multiple times, and we have met virtually several times. Class officers. She had another class officer earlier today, but tonight's the larger group. And I'm going to do a pop-in appearance at 8
Will
o'clock.
there be any other questions for tonight? Budget workshop?
I just have a question. So technically, then are we adopting? They're not adopting it tomorrow night. We would.
Yeah.
Do we
Yes.
feel as a board as far as additional discussion, or where we would do, or when we would have time to dive into that, Dean? After tomorrow night and before it goes to the public, or we're pretty much once we adopt, we're done?
Once you adopt, you've adopted the number.
Right.
This is a very good question. We can adopt the number tomorrow, the budget number.
Mhm.
If you want to have further conversation about digging deeper with reductions and using less unspent funds,
Right.
you can do that as long as the
Thank
number
you.
matches.
Okay. All right. So the number is what we're going for. Great. I just, didn't know
Yes.
what as a collective wanted to do that digging, or how we would go about it, and just wanted to.
So we have a little time to do that. But at some point, you walk away and you feel
Right.
that it's the budget you can live with. Because remember, changes can be made within that budget number that you approve even throughout the year. Sometimes you approve those transfers, and sometimes if they don't meet a threshold for board approval, that just happens naturally. You move the money around.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So the number given
Thank you, Karen.
tonight by Dr. UI for the budget will be brought to the board for a vote tomorrow to be adopted. Okay?
Yes.
Just wanted to let everyone know that.
Yep.
And if there's no more discussion, if I could have a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You may adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for
Thank you,
supporting
guys.
this
Bye-bye.
unusual situation.
Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
See you
Good job.
tomorrow.